So, welcome. I'm Claudine Close, the President of the Historical Society. This is our November program. For those of you who are members, you probably have gotten your newsletter, and you know by reading the update on our merger that we should be hearing any day now. The state is supposed to vote about the merger between the Historical Society and the Friends of Elmendorf. So we will keep you posted.
Excellent.
But I keep fingers crossed. You also will have read that we have a program in November. Did I say this was our November program? This is our October program. In November, we have one on Civil War that we are doing with the Rhinebeck Historical Society. In December, we have our Old Dutch Christmas open house. I hope everybody comes to that. It's lots of fun. And for those of you who love the Elmendorf Inn, we are having our silent auction on November 9th, the Friends of Elmendorf. So I hope you please come and support the inn. So, the catalyst for this program, we've talked about doing a program on the history of newspapers in Red Hook for quite a while, but the catalyst really was the transfer of original newspapers from the Red Hook Public Library to the Historical Society just 2 months ago. They've had this collection of original papers for years and years and years, originally in their local history room downstairs in the basement. When the library was renovated, they put it upstairs on the 3rd floor, but they never really did anything with it. So they didn't have room for it, they didn't have staff to allow researchers access to it. Hello, welcome.
Come in, Judge.
Come in. 3 o'clock, we start on time. Have a seat. Oh, well then our watches may be fast. Welcome. Oh, Wint, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Welcome, come in and sit down. So as I was saying, the impetus for the program was the decision by the public library to transfer their local history collections to the Historical Society. We were thrilled. It meant that we were able to add to our genealogy collection, but also to the newspaper collection. So for the first time, we have the original newspapers of Red Hook from 1859 up to through the 60s. After the program, I will invite you upstairs because we actually do have them housed up there and you can see them. But we also had to make room for all this original material, so we have duplicates. If anybody would like to take with them Gazette advertisements from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, or 2000s, you are welcome to help yourself because Rhinebeck Historical Society has them. They're on microfilm. They're up on the web. So, you know, if anybody wants to do an art project or whatever, but we really don't have room for them. The other thing that I wanted to say was that because we also found the microfilm of the papers from 1859 to 1917 that had been at the Red Hook Library. They're also at various other places. We were able to send them to Fulton History. If those of you who are history people know, there's this one guy who scans newspapers and has a website. It's a very funky website. It's very quirky, but I mean, it's amazing. You can search anything. So right now, actually, as of a couple of weeks ago, you'll be able to see the Red Hook journals on the Fulton History website and search. So that's a great thing.
Where is he? In upstate New York?
He's in Fulton.
Fulton?
Yeah, and he's a retired tech guy, and all by himself for several years. He has taken his garage and turned it into a processing center. He's got his camera, and he puts the microfilm in, and he photographs every page into a PDF, and he's got a search thing, and you can search names, anything. So you can now do that for Red Hook journals from 1859 to 1917. We do not have microfilm for 1920s to 1960s, so that's really where I'd like to see if we can get a grant to. It's very expensive to do it if we don't have the microfilm. So that's the first step in making these newspapers accessible to researchers and the general public. But we always thought it would be interesting to talk about the role of the Red Hook newspapers in the community. And I can't think of two better people to talk about this than Christopher Close and Christopher Munn. So I'll let them take it away.
Thank you. Today's program is really a conversation with Chris, and I'll be your facilitator, if I may, and a little introduction on the way to having this conversation. Come in, please, and welcome. Newspapers are really a story of technology, if I may, and the march of time, and also of communities, of human beings. What goes around comes around. The first newspapers were actually produced by the Greeks a couple of thousand years ago, and they probably were on tablets, stone tablets almost, I would think. But time marches on, and we come to the beginning of newspapering in Red Hook, which is the Red Hook Weekly Journal, the first edition of which was in April 29th of 1859. Right in smack dab in the middle of the most extraordinary century in human history, perhaps, and on the eve of our Civil War. And a man named Levi Peister was the founder and first editor of the Red Hook Weekly Journal, which we are very fortunate to have the first issue here. It's in glassine now, but please come take a look at it. You will notice something about it. It's got a great masthead, a banner headline, and then the rest of it is very small type and right there. And the first page is really what you would find in the magazines and newspapers in England, where we patterned ourselves after. Dickensian, Dickens was doing his works there, and we have, the first page of this paper is devoted to romances that continued, part of the subscription idea. But anyway, newspapers were both a public issue, but also a business, and they're inextricably linked. The idea of newspapers as a business was not really Levi Peister's rationale. Let me read you what he said. And remember, what goes around comes around. And this is from his first editorial in his first issue. In part, a word of introduction. We have every reason to believe that the enterprise and intelligence of this community, congratulations everyone, will sustain a local press and sustain it well, knowing that like the schoolhouse and the church, the press gives tone and standing to a place, adds to its importance, increases the value of property in its vicinity, and gives to businesses of every kind new life, vigor, and activity. No one unacquainted with the business can have an idea of the labor and care necessary in getting out the first number of a newspaper, and I see all of you probably written for publication before, every time you put pen or finger to keyboard, getting out anything that you have to write about. So that was Levi Peister, and he began the business, but his business was actually a job press, and that's where the technology comes in. If Gutenberg had gone into Levi Peister's shop, which was a couple of doors down from the Massenoke building in 1859, he would have felt pretty much at home. The press was different but the same, that he had invented some 300 years earlier, almost 400 years earlier. And it was capable in its heyday in the mid to the late 19th century of producing by hand through a series of one man could sit, or one person, and job work was done, printing in the 19th century was done a lot by women who did the repetitive nature of things at very low cost. Now what else is different? What goes around comes around, right? Women not being paid as much, but anyway, I will editorialize later. But the press could turn out as much as 800 pieces an hour. So that's how a newspaper could be printed, but the newspaper did not sustain the business. the business of Peister and the Red Hook Weekly Journal was both as, I don't know, was a lost leader, I think, because as you say, this is a confusing word of introduction here. If you read it, will sustain a local press, and I believe that he meant his press, which cost him a lot of money. It was a capital investment, his letterpress, his job press, which he had to keep going as much as he could by himself and with others that he would print with. And then he talks about the press giving tone and standing to a place. Tone and standing is not what a printing press is about, it's what the press is about. Tone and standing in the newspaper. And so that's what we have here in Red Hook as introduction to a series of newspapers which grabbed the public's attention and were successful over a period of local ownership and production for the next almost 150 years. Actually, almost 150 years to the date, because by the time the Red Hook Weekly Journal had gone out, and it went out very quickly, and it was succeeded by his brother, Albert Peister, who created the Red Hook Journal in 1866, and that carried on until 1917. Then there was the Red Hook Times, and then there was the Tivoli Times, and then the Red Hook Advertiser came along and bought the Tivoli Times, so it was the Advertiser. And then by the mid-20th century, with the press of the change in and the growth of population and speed of communication, telegraph, remember, had just been invented by, back in the 1840s and began, so we had national news being able to come into Red Hook, but you'll see very little of it except for the Civil War driving more national interest, if you will. You will see the paper change. It changed from a larger thing to down to a thing, but it carried national news as much as possible via telegraph. I believe that's how it got around during the Civil War, especially. You'll see the growth of advertising, but advertising was really, the Red Hook Advertiser was primarily for advertising, because that's how, as I said, the local businesses could express themselves, and Peister and his successors could make money. They made money from that, as well as subscriptions. The Red Hook Weekly Journal cost $1. You could subscribe to it in 1859 for $1. Now $1 in 1859 was worth about $1, I suppose, but it was worth more than not. Long story, ending with, and I don't want to take up much time, because this is really a conversation about two things, about technology, the march of time, and local interest, and sustaining the newspaper as a business, as well as the most important thing in our democracy, remember the Greeks had it first, was to get out the news or positions or editorialize on what's going on, so that the newspaper as the public record is incredibly important. And we are extraordinarily lucky for the confluence of technology and a very smart person who looked at technology today and brought back what we are now fortunate to have in the Observer, which is a newspaper of record, a printed record. Now, I'm an old enough troglodyte to have started at the Poughkeepsie Journal in 1970. When I came back, I spent the year of 71 and early 72 as a cub reporter on the Journal, learning how to write for Deadline. It's the best decision of my life. And in those days, the Journal was made up the same way that Gutenberg made things up, and basically it was on a rotogravure press and produced. But we have now Chris Munn, whom I'm going to turn the conversation over to by asking him. He is our editor, publisher, founder of The Observer. And Chris is the paradigm of the old-fashioned editor. He doesn't have an eye shade on, he doesn't have garters on his sleeves. He spends long hours back and forth with his reporters or at public meetings, taking down notes and getting it on. But he started first with technology, and I will let Chris introduce himself, tell you who he is, a little bit of background, and then we'll talk about his role in bringing back to life what we desperately need and which very few communities around this country have, which is a written record, a local newspaper. Chris Munn.
So I moved to Red Hook in 2005 with my wife and at that point 2 children. We've gone on, we have now 5 children and live just a little west of the village in the other end of Linden Acres, not far from Jonah. And we've really enjoyed it here. We enjoyed everything about the town and the setting in the Hudson Valley, the people, you know, and the
Where did you
environment.
move from?
I moved originally. We had lived in New Jersey for a while, and I actually grew up on Long Island. So the one thing that I found as I met more people and got more involved in the community and things is that it was very difficult to keep up with what was going on locally. And there were local newspapers. There was the Gazette Advertiser for a while, which ended in, I think it was 2009.
2009, February of 2009.
And the entire Taconic Press got shut down at that time. It had been bought by the Journal Register, which has gone bankrupt. I've lost track 3 or 4 times, and owns newspapers all the way across the country, including the Daily Freeman. But after that, between the Poughkeepsie Journal and Daily Freeman, local news, immediate news, it just wasn't being covered. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on that mattered to the people, to me, and to the other people that I thought they might want to know about. And my background is in technology. I do online websites, database-driven websites, things like that. So one thing I decided I would try is I said, well, I go to some of these meetings anyway, and I was on the planning board for a while, so I understand some of the planning and zoning issues that go on, so I can at least comprehend what matters or doesn't matter in some of these situations. So I started covering Red Hook online on what would be called a blog, as Red Hook Today, on redhooktoday.com is what it was, and started that in, I think it was March of 2011.
Let me interrupt here and ask you why, this is a blog. It's free, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just...
So where's the connection here between the blog, which anybody can do right now, maybe, and the newspaper, which Red Hook Today became?
Well, over the process, about the 6 or 7 months starting in March 2011, and I started going to these meetings, and I was doing maybe 1 article, maybe 2 articles a week on different things that were going on. And it was taking a lot of my time, to be honest. I had my work, I had my family. So I decided in the fall, I said, well, it has to go one direction or another. There's a lot more news to cover. I don't have the time and energy to cover it all myself as a hobby. And so I decided, either I'm going to stop this and take my free time back, and that's just the way it was, or I was going to try to make some money off it so that it could pay for itself.
So it was a business opportunity.
In a certain sense, I never expect and never expect to make a great deal of money running a newspaper. The question was, could it pay for the collection and distribution of the news and my time, and in a sense break even, and that was really the goal. So I have a little business background, having my own technology business. I understand, so I put together some numbers, and it looked like it could work as a free enterprise as opposed to a subscription enterprise. And the big problem with the newspaper industry, as we've all followed over the years, is that circulations are declining and declining and declining. And with declining circulation comes declining advertising revenue, because if you have half as many people reading the newspaper or a quarter as many people reading the newspaper, you can't expect the businesses to pay the same amount in advertising. So I just thought that, well, if I put it in every mailbox for free, and there are we get direct mail all the time in our mailbox, and people pay the post office a lot of money to put things in the mailbox all the time, then maybe enough businesses would be interested in participating that it would pay pay for itself.
But why would they be interested in spending money on a newspaper when everybody goes online?
Well, in a sense, the media right now is fractured. It's segmented. Everyone, there are so many outlets for everyone's time. If you think back, to, further you go back, whether it's back in the time when these newspapers came out, there were no other sources. Literally, I mean, you basically had to go into town and stand there and hope that somebody who knew something showed up, at the general store or the bar or at the mill or wherever. And then, there were 3 television networks that, used to go off the air. I remember, waiting for the flag show, in the morning when the flag would come on and they'd play the Star Spangled Banner and might put a cartoon on, when I was a kid. It's like, oh, it's the flag show.
We used to wait for the test pattern.
Oh, you'd watch the test pattern, and then the flag show, and then the flag show. Yes, absolutely. So, but then you had your newscast. You had Walter Cronkite. You had everybody watched those sources, and you had your local newspaper. Everybody read that newspaper. But now you have thousands of sources. You have dozens of websites. You have hundreds, perhaps thousands of television channels to choose from, and you have tons of other entertainment that segments it. By putting a newspaper, putting this in every mailbox, in every home, it exposes it to everybody. And nobody has to pay for it, except me. And the advertisers get the opportunity to, be in front of people in a way that it's not junk mail. People, in the beginning, it's funny, it'd be 3 or 4 months after we went to print in March of 2012, people would come up and say, oh, I just saw the first issue of your newspaper. It came in my mailbox last week. And I said, oh, there were like 7 or 8 other issues in your mailbox. And I felt a little bad, but I realized that people were just so used to getting all this junk mail that
they just throw it out automatically.
They were just throwing it out with everything else, and they didn't realize that there was a newspaper. But it was also rewarding. People were like, this is amazing, this is good. So the feedback was tremendously positive once we got started.
So now you have a, I presume, a going concern, where it wouldn't be in my wouldn't be in my mailbox, right? What are the challenges that you face, though, that are akin to what Levi Peister and, say, Alice Norton 50 years ago faced with the Red Hook Advertiser and then the Gazette Advertiser under Mike Strong and his family? What is it about newspapering what are the major challenges of putting out a newspaper?
Well, I mean, you always have to have enough advertising. This is really what it boils down to keep things going. You're competing against many other places. You're competing against online advertising, which some people go to. You have radio. You have even the movie theater. You have the things. So there's lots of options that people can choose from. But so far we've got the loyalty of a lot of businesses around here, and that keeps things going. From the news side of the ledger, I'm going to keep track of all the meetings that go on, what goes on at the meetings in terms of when they schedule one and don't announce it as broadly as they might otherwise if they don't want people going. That's happened in some jurisdictions. So you have to keep up on that. Making sure to try to find enough cover reporters that will actually attend all these meetings. I've got a great editor who's basically been volunteering the entire time, her time, who does our consulting editor, Jean Patman, who has tremendous experience. She's worked at Newsday and other places in the past, and she's retired now and has devoted countless hours to making this paper look the way it does.
Does she live in Red Hook?
She does. She's a Red Hook resident who volunteered her time when she heard we were going to print.
Why? May I ask why?
She I think loves the idea of the newspaper. She loves doing it, and she's invested in it, which is wonderful. Wonderful, invested her time in it. We have a full-time employee, Sarah Imboden now, who is my assistant editor, who does a lot of the day-to-day tracking of who goes where. And we have a whole bunch of young people who go out to these meetings.
Who want to be reporters.
Want to be reporters.
Journalists.
They're still going to school for journalism despite the, despite anything. They want to write. People, the young people want to write. They go to school for journalism, and they go to New Paltz, and they go to Marist, and they go to Bard, and then this is a huge opportunity for them to, cut their teeth part-time, freelance, and build up their resume while getting paid. So.
There's a curious question here. When I was a cub on the Journal, the Journal had a newsroom in those days. It was actually a newsroom, and it had a horseshoe. The city editor was there, the managing editor, and the wire editor, and the sports editor, and there were 12 reporters. And the Journal in those days was an afternoon paper, and so we covered all sorts of. Just as you did, I covered northern Dutchess County, 7 towns, 5 school districts, and several villages. And so I would go hither and yon, and I found myself in Millerton, one of my first assignments, a major assignment after doing the birth announcements for a couple of weeks and learning how to do that. I ended up in the bitter cold January night covering the village board as they debated whether to put in a sewage system in Millerton.
We're still debating that.
Excuse me, this is Sarah Hermans, and she knows exactly what happened. No, you're right, they are still debating it. Well, I did the fabulous thing, and my point being, how do you teach and train cub reporters? Because you're entrusted with coming back and giving the news, right? So I come back, and I write, village board votes $2.3 million sewer system from Millerton, the vote was 4-3. By Christopher Close, and I was swelled up like a toad. The next morning, the phone rings, I pick it up and say, Mr. Close, yes, this is Amelia Truns. Don't ever step foot in my village again. Bang. Amelia Truns ran the village of Millerton. For 40 years, she was mayor, and she said, you did not stay for the real vote, that was a preliminary vote. I watched you get up and walk out. Don't. I learned the first lesson, but it was a very costly but brilliant lesson to have learned. So my question to you, Chris, is how in this newsroom of yours, where you have a volunteer editor and a full-time employee, how do you train these kids to do what I, learned how to do at great expense? Not to make mistakes. What do you say?
Well, I mean, everyone's going to make mistakes eventually. But from our perspective, we look for people who have gone to school for journalism already. There's plenty of people out there. People hopefully who've had some journalism experience before. But generally speaking, we have a number of online manuals and materials they review. The basics of journalism to make sure they are familiar with the standards. We also require all our reporters to record every meeting they attend, so that we can make sure the quotes are accurate.
Technology.
And if there's a confusion, which many times in the zoning board and the planning board, there's a lot of technical things going on, approvals of this and so on and so forth, we're able to review the tape and review the digital recording and try to suss out what was actually going on. And of course, nowadays everybody has a cell phone, including, much to their dismay, town board members and planning board members who often get calls repeatedly for clarification on our articles in our effort to get the information out as accurately as possible. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of turnover, to be honest. We've had a number of people poached. We had one person go to the Poughkeepsie Journal. We've had, people take internships at, Newsday, and they came back because they're still in school. But once they graduate from college, chances are they'll be off to
Get a job.
bigger things, and a full-time job. I mean, these are not full-time positions. They're not gonna, most of our reporters who are not in school have a full-time job, and during the day, and they want to get back. They want to get a journalism job eventually. They just haven't been able to. So 4 or 5 nights a week, they're able to cover a meeting. They write a couple thousand words here or there, and we're all to the better for it.
Getting back to the issue, what makes local interest, though, for everybody. What is it you try to maintain in the Observer?
Well, everything has to
What
have.
is that tone that Levi Peister talks about?
Well, we have a mission statement which I try to explain to all of our reporters, which is that what I don't want to have happen is for something to go on at a meeting that the people should know about, or some people should know about, and for them not to know in time to make their voice heard if they want. So, what we try to do is if there's going to be a public hearing, if there's going to be, if there's an issue before a board, if they're going to make a decision on something, that we want to put the information in there. And maybe most of the time, it's not a big issue. People won't be wanting to go out. But a lot of times, even something that seems innocuous, people are very interested. People want to know more. People want to go there and ask questions or express their pleasure or displeasure. In our recent issue, we had somebody who's putting up a large deer fence in Milan.
Yes, I saw that,
Right,
and I was very interested in that.
Right, it seemed like a very large fence, a large, in terms of length. And, I understand, deer come and they eat the vegetables out of our vegetable garden and they trample all over our yard and, I don't like it as much as the next guy, and it was just very curious, and it was just the size of it made it interesting. We put it in and there are people on both sides. People have, written in to the paper, which I love. More letters, please, more letters. And commented online, saying, well, more power to him. Let him protect his property from, the deer. And on the other side, are we going to be able to see this from the road? Are we going to have this big, deer fence as we drive along the road? But things along those lines, that's our goal. Our goal is to put information that has to have local impact. We have an occasional article about county stuff, which would impact our town. But we stay away from state news, national news that's already covered elsewhere. If you want state or national, there are 100 news websites you could go to get that. There are a dozen papers on the newsstand where you can read about what the president or the House of Representatives or the Senate or any of those people, do. That's covered to death. There's no reason for me to do that. Instead, we cover the things, that I'd say probably 75% of what we put in the paper is not covered anywhere else, which, these local meetings that the Poughkeepsie Journal or the Daily Freeman can't afford to have somebody, to send somebody to. Not for every town that they cover, so.
Well, they used to.
Not
And that's the rub of the newspapering business, because when you could have net return on investment of 25 and 30 and 35%, that's why newspapers are so, so lucrative and so gobbled up. When I was in the Journal was the successor paper to the Poughkeepsie New Yorker, I believe, am I right? And that was an independent newspaper. It's the second oldest newspaper in the country, okay? But it was bought by the Spidell chain, which was out of Nevada, in the first wave of major small town dailies getting bought up in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, because the march of technology. You mentioned 3 television stations. Well, here in Red Hook, when we had the Red Hook Advertiser, Rhinebeck had the Rhinebeck Gazette. And it was the crush of radio, post-war radio and television, which drove, in my opinion, looking at this stuff, drove the merger of the Rhinebeck Gazette and the Red Hook Advertiser. Always you have the press of technology forcing this consolidation, and the Red Hook Advertiser and the Gazette Advertiser, and then Taconic Newspapers and Taconic Press, and they bought up the Harlem Valley Times, they bought up the Hyde Park Plainsman, they bought up all of the papers around, and then suddenly we found ourselves without any local press. And for 5 years or so, we have been without that local focus. And now we have what I would term the future, perhaps. This is a question for all of us here, but the future of what the Poughkeepsie Journal has emblazoned over its doorway as you go in, and you can't miss it as a reporter. Here shall the press the public's right maintain. And that's part of an ancient homily, and I've turned to my erudite friend here for the rest of that, but that's what the quote is, that's the salient quote for newspapering. And the local angle is such that I think it's the nature of, I don't see much difference, pardon me, between the Observer today and the weekly journal, then the Red Hook Journal, then the et cetera, because we have a combination of stories of human interest. You do have those as well. You have the public voice and you have local news. I'm going to digress for a minute, because we are very fortunate to have in this extraordinary community, remember, this community of enterprise and intelligence, which we all represent generation after generation. About 50 years ago, or now longer, there came upon us an extraordinary publication, the Berrytown Explorer. Raise your hand if you've seen copies of the Berrytown Explorer. Those of us who grew up here couldn't wait to see the next edition of Chandler and Helen Chapman's Berrytown Explorer, because it was filled. It was a monthly, it was $1 a year. If you can't smile, quit. All the news that's went to print. It was fabulous. It was a compendium, and you had people from Saul Bellow writing for it to Chris Close. I had a couple of pieces in. But it was a wonderful paper. But in the same vein, now for entertainment, but using the news and using human interest and local interest, we have the Red Hook Journal, reborn by Maynard Hamm out of his own curiosity and creativity and persistence. We have this extraordinary compendium of great stuff from 100 years ago, 110 years ago. Right now you've produced and there are copies which we'll hand out of the 1863 edition, updated to 2013, the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation and the Battle of Gettysburg. For a look at, again, back to the national coming down to the local, in the 1863 issue of the Red Hook Journal, you will see, and I was looking for it, I thought it'd be, right away, January 1st. The January 8th issue has the Emancipation Proclamation. It's an extraordinary look at the national coverage here in Red Hook. And a little later, take a look at the editorial in the August issue of the Red Hook Journal. It's a copperhead approach, because we have a nest of copperheads here. And so it's an
To
interesting.
explain for those of us.
Well, the copperheads were shall we say, anti-democratic, and they supported the Southern cause to a degree, I think. They were against Lincoln, rapidly so. And in this editorial, Levi Peister had died by that time, and his wife had taken over the paper, and she was apparently a copperhead. But it's fascinating reading. But thanks to Maynard, we have the old news redone in a great way. Woody used to send it to me when it came out. I couldn't wait for it to come. And I'm reading news from the 1850s and 60s and 70s. So the issue of entertainment is one that's very important in the local connection, which you do so well. Perhaps
I have a
I'd
question.
like to open it now to the floor, but just
Well,
do a
there's
round
another,
table.
obviously, use that those of us who really love history
Ah.
find. It's such an incredible glimpse into the history of Red Hook when you go through these papers. I want to do a whole dissertation now, but I don't do it at the time. But anyway, so the question to you, Chris, is for those who 100, 150 years from now want to know what happened in Red Hook at this very local level, are you archiving the papers digitally?
Well, the way newspapers are done now,
Yeah.
everything's done electronically
Right.
in terms of the layouts and
Right.
the papers themselves.
Right,
I have the ability to reproduce on a printer at any time
right.
any copy of the paper that I
Mhm.
need. So, in a sense, yes, they're online in the form, in a digital form. The articles themselves are on the web, where they will be probably forever, because nothing ever disappears off the internet, right? And you know, the physical papers, I have copies, you know, here and there at my house, but generally
Yeah.
speaking, in terms of, you know, the ability to just reprint a copy at will.
It's there.
Oh, it's-
Yeah, as long as the technology, again, doesn't change, that
Right.
there, it'll be there for people, hopefully 100 years from now.
Right, and these are standard formats that have been around for a number of years now.
Right.
You know, I'm sure people thought about formats from 20 years ago, electronic formats.
That's right,
They
yeah,
thought
that's
they'd
right,
last
so-
forever, but,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm fairly sure that'll last.
good,
I don't know about 150
Good.
years, but we'll see.
yeah.
Any other questions for, yes, please. Charlie.
You read, Chris, about the fact that many young people don't read newspapers anymore. Have you thought about partnering with the Red Hook High School?
Mhm.
Because when I went to high school, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, you had to read a newspaper, and they provided the New York Times, the Herald Tribune, and the Daily News for, I think, a penny a day,
Mhm.
because the social studies teacher would say, you've got to clip out an article and get up and talk about it when we do current events at the end of the week. Have you thought about partnering with the high school to get the kids to start reading newspapers again?
Well, we deliver a pile of copies to all the schools. And I've spoken on a couple of occasions with the principals in an attempt to interface with their journalism programs. But to be frank, it's the amount of time in the day at this point. I have a regular job in addition to this job, as well as the need to constantly be, you know, pursuing the advertising to pay for this. The margins are not what they might have been before. I'd be happy to work with the schools in that manner and to provide extra copies. Again, this is a free paper, so there are a good 2,000 copies spread throughout our publishing area between, you know, Hannaford, the Rhinebeck Bank, down into the village of Red Hook, down into Statsburg. Statsburg Post Office gets 75 to 100 so that the residents down there can keep up on Red Hook and Rhinebeck news and Milan. So I'd be happy to work with them. I've spoken to the principals that really hadn't gone anywhere in terms of any sort of journalism there. As far as young people not reading the physical newspapers, probably true. They're spending more of their times on their phone and on the computer. But we've got that covered too. We're online. We've got the news online. Frankly, you know, a lot of the stories we do are of more interest to the homeowners and the taxpayers, perhaps, than the local students. But you know, they'll eventually be taxpayers and homeowners too. So you know, we'll see where that goes.
What about the issue of using volunteers? Perhaps some of us who could be interested in helping you and making the connection between the schools and journalism and the understanding of what a newspaper is to our democracy.
Well, I'm open to any volunteer who wants to help. Chris has written a number of articles in the paper, which I'm sure you guys have seen, especially during the bicentennial,
That was fun.
which was actually one of the things I was looking at when I started the paper. I mean, I knew that the bicentennial year was there. There were going to be a lot of things to cover, a lot of material to cover on the bicentennial. And it was very helpful from March until August 1st when we went from just being a Red Hook covering paper, and August 1st we expanded to include Rhinebeck. It was very helpful to have the bicentennial going on at the same time, and it was great fun to cover, so at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
Did you have to staff up in order to increase your coverage area when you went to Rhinebeck? And
Yeah.
are you likely to go any further than that, or is it pretty much?
Well, I'm right now, as I said, turnover is an issue because people, you know, either they get a full-time job where they can no longer do, you know, work for our paper. So we're constantly finding new cover borders, so to speak, to cover beats. My preference is to have the same person at the same meeting every time because they can see the story. They can understand the storyline. And one of the processes is every meeting that's attended, I want a summary of the agenda items within 24 hours. And since we're not a daily, I can say 24 hours. I don't have to say 30 minutes. And they can go through the agenda items, and then I can read that, and I can see if a story moves from Red Hook to Rhinebeck. You know, like the dog park, the Red Hook Rhinebeck dog park was in both meetings, and I can see from the Red Hook reporter and the Rhinebeck reporter them interacting. I can see things go from a planning board to a town board to a zoning board and back again. So I can try to keep the narrative in my head. So yes, I had to add additional reporters. We went from 2 villages and a town and a school district to 2 school districts, 3 towns, and 3 villages. So we have 8 beats plus this 2 high school sport beats to cover. So so in a sense, 10 different beats. So right now we have, I think, 6 or 7 different people attending meetings or writing. It varies up and down each issue depending on who schedules what. In terms of further expansion, you know, this footprint's a natural footprint. The Red Hook and Rhinebeck, they're in a sense sister communities, having once been one community, and Milan is right there on the doorstep. And it's really based on the school district is the envelope I in a sense was looking at. The Red Hook School District encompasses Red Hook and Milan, and then the Rhinebeck School District is below that. And the zip codes tend to overlap as well. We've recently actually announced that we're going to open a second newspaper. It's going to take the footprint of the Hyde Park Townsman. So it won't be in the Observer's pages. You know, it won't be expanding that, but it'll be a separate paper which actually will have a larger circulation, slightly larger of 14,000. This is 13,000 here.
It's phenomenal.
Are you insane?
No.
I am.
That's a great question, Robert.
Well, now that you mention it. Well, it's a proof of concept. When I decided to do this paper, I went around to local businesses and I said, "This is what I'm doing." And I had a lot of help from a friend of mine, John Schmitz, who's a professional graphic designer. He came up with the original look and helped create a prototype. And I walked around with the prototype of the paper in a black folio. And I said, "This is what we want to do." And I said, "Would you like to buy some advertising?" And people bought. And when they bought, I said, "Well, then I'll do it." And if not enough people bought, I would say, "Well, here's your money back," you know, because it doesn't make sense to try it. And I mean, the first issue didn't pay for itself. The second issue didn't pay for itself. The third issue didn't pay for itself. But the advertising grew. And I'm happy to say now that it pays for itself, which is great.
But how do you base your rate? What do you base your rates on?
Based on what else is out there. I mean,
Nothing.
Yeah. Well, there is everything else. I mean, there's direct mail. I mean, it costs somebody. I mean, for the distribution of the current newspaper, would cost someone $1,600 to put something in every mailbox in that zone, and then plus cost whatever it would be to print 11,000 of those items. So you're looking at a significant cost. Because I mean, if you just do an 8.5 by 11 into every mailbox, it's going to cost $1,500 or $1,600 for one time. So you know, a small ad on paper, you could get 6 months. You know, so you can get 6 months
I see.
in the Observer. So, and while it won't be the only thing, it also won't be the junk mail, I guess.
Yes.
So, you know, it's based on what do I need to keep it going? How many ads do I think local businesses will buy? You know, there are some other publications that go into the mailbox on a regular basis, and they have rates as well. You know, in terms of the rate structure, it's worked. You know, the local. It's supposed to be local businesses. I mean, I'm never going to be able to attract, you know, Geico and Coca-Cola and things like that. I'd be happy to take their money. But, so if you're listening, don't take that the wrong way. But they're not going to pay for the newspaper. You know, it's local businesses, and that's the way it should be. This is local news, and locals are going to be reading it. And you know, when you know, some of the local advertisers right here in the village, you know, are in the paper, that's what they want. They want people to see that they're there, that they're supporting community journalism, and also to, you know, come buy their products, hopefully.
I think a lot of us assume that at some point, because this is a tremendously valuable resource for the community, there will be a price attached in terms of subscription or at the newsstand. Is this something that is at present just too much trouble to bother with? I mean, in terms of keeping track of.
Well, I'd estimate. Well, that's one of the things. You know, if you have subscribers, then you have to track all that information. So then now, so you're adding a salary just for your, just for that bookkeeper, you're adding a full-time salary to keep track of who hasn't subscribed and to chase them down and all that other stuff. You know, the postal service rates for this kind of delivery, which goes in every mailbox, are very competitive, thanks to lobbying by larger entities that, you know, magazines and so forth, and that's made this possible. You know, if at some point the post office, you know, rates change and it makes it not financially feasible to do it, then either the ad rates would go up or the paper would no longer go into every mailbox. A paid subscription of a micro-local like this, I mean, if you look at what the Gazette Advertiser had in terms of subscriptions, I mean, right now I have a larger distribution. Again, it's a free paper, so you can't compare them directly. I have a larger distribution than more than half the Taconic papers combined had. And that's with one newspaper.
Wow.
With the two newspapers, again, it's every 2 weeks, it's done a daily. My distribution on one of my publication days will be equal to the Daily Freeman on one of their days. Now again, they're doing a different business, it's a different model. So that's, you know, again, right now the financial model works under all those. You know, a paid subscription base would go down from, you go from 13,000 papers printed to 2 or 3,000 on a paid subscription basis. Even on a free, put it on the news, put it out there and let people pick it up manually, you'd be at 4, maybe 5. And that's estimates from based on other publications that are out there similar. So, and the ad rates would drop accordingly. You know, other papers that are out there that you see in the supermarket that, you know, I pick them all up for multiple reasons. I picked them up before I was in the business. I pick them up now because I want to see what other people are doing. You know, their circulation is either they're covering the whole Hudson Valley, like, you know, the beautiful Chronogram, which does great work as an A&E, but they're not newspapers. So.
Well, in Hyde Park, you'll have competition, and you'll probably put the competition out of business if you'll be free and they're $1.
Well, in terms of, you know, there's no Hyde Park specific paper. There's one that's based in Hyde Park.
Hudson Valley News.
The Hudson Valley News is based in Hyde Park, but they cover, you know, some Poughkeepsie and Red Hook and Rhinebeck and stuff occasionally. But if you look at their pages, they're subscription based. They're not ad based, so chances are I'm not going to be pulling many ads out of their pages since they're based on subscription. So we'll see where that goes. You know, I'm going to run my business, and I know Jim, and he's going to run his business. You know, and I know, you know, most of the other people who run publications around here. I've met them, shook their hand. I said, you know, I'm running a newspaper. You're running a Chronogram. I mean, the Chronogram is not a newspaper. I'm not going to take anything. I'm not going to put the Chronogram out of business. I don't want it. You know, it has nothing. They're completely different markets. You know, it's a different ecosystem.
Were there other questions?
No.
Okay. Yes, please.
Given, you know, that everybody agrees it's wonderful that the Observer is free locally, would it be advantageous to offer a paid subscription to those living outside the area?
We do that.
You do?
Yes. Right now we charge $52 a year, and it's mailed first class to wherever you are. We also have some people who subscribe, not a lot, you know, a handful of people who are nice enough to subscribe who already get it in their mailbox in an effort to support the paper. So they're willing to pay, you know, $52 a year because it's a wonderful thing to have in their mailbox, and they're happy to do that, and it doesn't cost us extra. It's really a break-even proposition for even at that level, because you know, the most recent issue was 24 pages. That cost $1.55 in postage, plus the time, plus the envelope, plus the time to put it in the envelope. So, which basically I do because it's not a lot. Sure. So it's really a break-even proposition, and it's a lot. You know, some snowbirds, people who are away for the summer, you know, at their cabin. Yeah, well, not so many kids at college. You know, again, they'll check it online or something along those lines. We've had gift subscriptions to seniors who have moved away or are residing elsewhere now, no longer in the distribution center. So yeah, so we do have that option.
They want that connection to Red Hook.
Yes, they want to follow. And people who are considering moving to the area that have subscribed as well. I'm going to be moving to this area, in 3 months. I want, can you start sending me the paper now? Sure.
For those of us who grew up with the Advertiser, though, the hook from home was the most extraordinarily interesting, but obviously everyday mundane thing. It was called About the Town. And it was just Mr. and Mrs., Curly visited Mr. and Mrs. or went with their daughter to New York or Poughkeepsie for shopping. And squib after squib after squib like that. And I don't know what it was about it, but it really tied me to this community.
Sounds like Facebook.
And on that happy note of technology coming around, I'm going to ask you one last question. Are you what are you? A journalist, a full-time technological, but you're most of all a father, I know, of 5, and very, very busy.
Yes. I would say, I've always felt that I was an entrepreneur. More than a journalist. I never went to journalism school. I learned it on the fly. Technology I went to school for, but I went off on my own, very early on. So I think that's more of a.
Well, it's Red Oak's fortune. Thank you very much. Now a word from our sponsor.
Yes, I'd like to invite those of you who want to stay, and Maynard, I think, has copies of his wonderful compilation of the Red Hook Journal old.
October's from 1900 up to about 1907. A couple of years are missing because the newspapers are missing.
Here. So,
and that's August, that's the latest.
Okay, I'm going to pass these around because
Maynard
really,
has
for those who haven't seen them,
this is you need to get this.
Do you have
I have,
these?
I have,
Okay,
absolutely.
it gives you such a great
flavor of
sense of what was going on in Red Hook at the time.
It's 1913 and 1863 in there.
Yeah, and they're always available at the archives, so we're open on Tuesdays. Feel free to come. But we have in the next room apple cider donuts and apple cider for those who want to mill around. And I invite, as I said, people to come upstairs because we do have the newspapers upstairs, both that we are keeping for archival purposes and those that we would like people to take away.
This is
If I could just say a word about this editorial tone in the old Red Hook Journal of 1863 that Chris the vehemence, the venom of the language will turn your hair. And what she, if it is the widow of the publisher, is saying, is about Abraham Lincoln, and just saying, this man is incompetent, he's a crook, it's a travesty that he's in office, that our Constitution is being trampled, and this was at the same time that, and she is, is letting the reader assume that the majority of the people who are reading the paper and living in Red Hook feel as she does. And yet it's the same community that is sending men, some of them under conscription, into the Union Army. And it's the summer of Gettysburg. I mean, it's just, you just say, I didn't know people felt that way about Abraham Lincoln. And it's an amazing thing. I mean, it's just, that really ought to be somehow revealed when local history is told.
We're going to talk about that on November 9th, and it's especially gratifying to me to have a connection that dates back to really that time in Sarah Herman's A House Divided. Thanks to Sarah, we were able to put together a terrific story about the Losey brothers. One who went off to New Orleans and fought, and the other who became Dr. Losey in Upper Red Hook, and how chagrined Harvey was it Harvey? It was my memory fails me. The Confederate after the war who apologized to his family for making such a terrible mistake. But exactly the passion of the Civil War comes home on November 9th back here in this room via Sarah and some of the other stories that have been told in journals. We're having it combined with David Miller, and I'll go back and forth reading from some of the selected journals. It's tough, but incredible stuff, and it puts us right back there.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Chris, for
Chris.
coming on a beautiful Sunday. I know it's family time, so we really appreciate your taking the time to talk to us about our
Now,
favorite newspaper.
Up here, you
We love
have,
it. We love
you
it.
have the original.